It was one of those mornings when everything seemed to go wrong. The air was cold, the rain kept falling in light drops, and the streets were already crowded with people rushing somewhere. The woman stood at the edge of the train platform, holding her small bag close to her chest. She had barely slept the night before, and her eyes were heavy, but she couldn't afford to miss this train. She had been waiting for this trip for weeks. It wasn't just any trip. It was her only chance to reach home in time for her mother's birthday. She had saved for the ticket, packed a small gift, and planned everything carefully. But that morning the city buses ran late, and by the time she reached the station, the ticket line was long and slow. Her heart raced as she looked at the big screen flashing the departure time. The train she needed would leave in just a few minutes. When she finally reached the ticket counter, the clerk told her there was only one seat left. Relief washed over her. She paid quickly and held the paper ticket like it was gold. Finally, something had gone right. She turned to make her way toward the platform, but just as she did, a small sound made her stop. It was the soft cry of a little child. A few steps away stood a man with a little girl in his arms. The child looked no more than 3 years old, her head resting on her father's shoulder, her tiny hands clutching his coat. The man looked tired. His eyes were dark from lack of sleep. His clothes were plain and slightly wet from the rain. He kept patting the girl's back, whispering something softly. The woman didn't mean to stare, but she noticed the man glancing toward the ticket counter again and again. His voice trembled as he spoke to the clerk. "Please, sir, I just need one ticket. My daughter hasn't eaten all morning." The clerk shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. All seats are sold. The next train leaves in 4 hours." The man sighed and closed his eyes for a moment, holding his daughter tighter. The woman could hear the faint sound of the little girl crying again, saying she wanted to go home. Something about that small voice touched her heart. She stood still for a few seconds, torn between her need to get home and the sight in front of her. She thought about her mother waiting at home, about the warm food, about the joy on her mother's face when she would walk through the door. She had been looking forward to it for weeks. But then she looked again at the man and his daughter. The man looked completely defeated. He had tried every way to get a ticket but couldn't. The child was now whimpering softly and he looked helpless. It wasn't a scene she could ignore. Without thinking much more, she took a step forward. "Excuse me," she said softly to the man. He looked up, surprised. "You need to get on this train, right?" He nodded slowly, unsure what she meant. "Yes, I need to get home. My daughter's been sick. She's been in the city hospital for days. I just want to take her home." The woman swallowed hard. She could feel her heart beating fast. "You can take my ticket," she said quietly. The man blinked. "What? No, I can't." "Please," she said, offering the ticket. "You need it more than I do." He looked at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Miss, I can't accept that." "You'll miss your train," she smiled faintly. "It's okay. I'll take the next one." For a few seconds the man didn't move. Then he slowly reached out and took the ticket from her trembling hand. His eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Thank you. I'll find a way to repay you one day." She shook her head. "Just take care of your little girl." "That's enough." He gave her one last look, full of gratitude, and hurried toward the platform, the child still in his arms. She watched as he boarded the train just before the doors closed. As the train began to move, she saw him through the window, waving slightly. She smiled back, though a part of her heart sank. The rain had stopped, but the station felt colder now. She walked back to a nearby bench and sat down, clutching her small bag. Hours passed slowly. The next train wouldn't arrive for a long time, and she didn't have much money left. She bought a small cup of tea from a vendor and sipped it quietly, watching people come and go. Some were rushing, some were laughing, some were tired like her, but no one knew what had just happened, how she'd given up something important for a stranger. She thought about her mother again and sighed. She could imagine her mother waiting at the door, looking at the clock, wondering why her daughter hadn't arrived yet. The woman wished she could call, but her old phone battery had died earlier that morning. All she could do was wait. As she sat there, her thoughts drifted back to the man and his daughter. She hoped they were safe and that the little girl was resting now. A strange calm came over her, mixed with a bit of sadness. She didn't regret what she had done, but she felt the quiet ache of sacrifice. When the next train finally arrived, it was late evening. The platform lights flickered as she boarded with the few passengers left. She found an empty corner seat and stared out the window as the city lights faded into darkness. The rhythmic sound of the train wheels was comforting, almost like a lullaby. She tried to rest, but her mind kept replaying the moment she handed over her ticket. She wondered if she'd ever see that man again or if he'd ever remember her face. Probably not, she thought. People move on. Acts of kindness often fade quietly into memory. The train ride felt longer than usual. Outside, the countryside looked peaceful, but inside she felt a mix of exhaustion and peace. She didn't know it then, but that single act, the choice to give away her ticket, would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. When the train finally reached her hometown, the station was quiet and nearly empty. She stepped down, stretching her stiff legs. Her mother was there, standing near the entrance, her face lighting up with joy the moment she saw her. "Where have you been?" "I was so worried," her mother said, hugging her tightly. The woman smiled and said, "I missed the first train, but I made it." They walked home together, talking softly. She didn't mention the story about the ticket. Somehow it felt too personal, something she wanted to keep in her heart for now. Her mother served her warm soup, and as they sat together, she felt grateful. That night, before sleeping, she looked out the small window of her room. The stars were faint, but one shone brighter than the others. She thought of the tired man and his child. Maybe they were home too, safe and warm. Maybe the little girl was sleeping peacefully now. She smiled to herself and whispered, "That's enough." The world outside was quiet, but her heart felt light. She didn't know the man's name or where he came from. She didn't expect anything in return. All she knew was that she had done something that felt right. As she closed her eyes, she remembered her mother's words from years ago. "The world can be cold sometimes, but don't let that stop you from being kind." She didn't know that those simple words would one day lead to something much bigger. She didn't know that her kindness would circle back to her in ways she couldn't yet dream of. For now, all she knew was that she had helped someone in need, and even though she reached home late, her heart was full. The rain started again that night, light and gentle, like a soft reminder that life moves in quiet circles. Some people come and go, but the things we do for others, those small, unnoticed acts, have a way of finding their way back to us when we least expect them. And while the woman drifted into sleep, miles away, a man sat by a window with his little daughter sleeping in his arms. He looked out into the dark and whispered a silent promise that someday, somehow he would return the kindness of the stranger who gave up her seat on a rainy morning. Neither of them knew that their paths would cross again, but destiny had already begun to write the next chapter. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of her small room. The woman woke up to the soft sound of birds outside the window and the familiar smell of her mother's tea boiling in the kitchen. For a few seconds, she forgot about the long day before, the rush, the station, the tired man, the child, and the train she had missed. But as she sat up, memories came back one by one, and she found herself smiling faintly. Her mother called her for breakfast. She walked into the kitchen, where the table was set with warm bread, butter, and tea. Her mother looked happy to have her home, asking questions about her job and life in the city. The woman nodded, answering quietly, but her thoughts kept drifting away. She didn't tell her mother the full story of why she was late. It wasn't that she wanted to hide it. She just didn't feel the need to explain. To her, it wasn't something grand or special, just something she felt was right to do in that moment. After breakfast, she went outside for a walk around her old neighborhood. Everything looked the same. The narrow streets, the small shops, the children playing with sticks and old tires. The air was fresh, and she could feel the calm she had missed in the city. But as peaceful as it was, a small thought kept tugging at her mind. She wondered where that man was now. Did he make it home safely? Was his daughter feeling better? Did he remember her face? Probably not, she thought again. People move on with their lives quickly. Still, every now and then she found herself thinking about them. The man's tired eyes, the child's tiny hands. It wasn't about expecting anything. It was just a quiet curiosity that lingered in her heart. A few days passed quickly. She helped her mother with chores, visited an old friend, and spent evenings sitting on the rooftop, watching the sunset. Life felt peaceful but uncertain. She knew she would have to return to the city soon for work. Her job wasn't great. Long hours, little pay, and not much respect. but it was what she had. When she finally took the train back, the city greeted her with its usual noise and rush. The roads were full of cars, the air heavy with smoke, and people looked busy, always in a hurry. She walked to her small rented room, opened the creaky door, and sighed. The walls were plain. The bed was small, but it was home. She changed into her work clothes and went to the cafe where she worked as a cashier. It wasn't easy, standing all day, serving impatient customers, smiling even when tired, but she did her best. She greeted everyone with kindness, even those who barely looked at her. Some nights after closing, she would sit alone near the window, counting the little money she had saved. It was never enough, but she tried not to complain. She reminded herself that helping someone, even a stranger, had given her a kind of peace money couldn't buy. One evening, as she was wiping tables, one of her coworkers asked why she always looked so calm, even when things were hard. She just smiled and said, "Because being kind costs nothing." The coworker laughed lightly, not really understanding, and walked away. But she meant it. She had learned something that day at the station, that small choices can carry a quiet power. Weeks turned into months. She worked hard, paid her bills, and tried to stay hopeful. But life didn't get easier. Her manager reduced her shifts because business was slow. Some days she went home with barely enough money for food. Still, she didn't lose her gentle spirit. Sometimes she would see parents walking with their children near the cafe. Every time she saw a small girl holding her father's hand, her heart softened. It reminded her of that rainy morning, of the child asleep in her father's arms. On weekends, she visited the park near the city library. She liked sitting on the same wooden bench under a large tree, feeding the pigeons with bits of leftover bread. It was her quiet escape. People passed by without noticing her, and she didn't mind. She found peace in simple things, the breeze, the sunlight, and the laughter of children playing nearby. But one Sunday afternoon, as she sat there, she overheard two people talking on the next bench. A woman was telling her friend about a kind stranger she met who had changed her life. The story reminded her of her own small act months ago. It made her wonder. How many people quietly help others every day, never knowing the impact they leave behind? That thought stayed with her. Maybe kindness had a ripple effect, she thought. Maybe the man she helped had gone on to help someone else. She smiled at the idea. It felt comforting. One evening, after a long shift, she was walking home when it started to rain again. The same kind of soft drizzle as that morning at the station. She stopped by a small shop for cover, standing near the doorway as water splashed on the road. A little boy next to her was selling flowers, shivering slightly from the cold. He looked up at her and smiled weakly, holding out a bunch of roses. She didn't really have the money, but she bought one anyway. "Keep the rest," she told him. The boy's eyes lit up. "Thank you," he said, and ran off toward the next customer, holding his small basket tightly. The woman stood there for a moment, holding the single rose, smiling softly. She didn't know why, but something about giving made her feel alive, even when she didn't have much to give. Days continued in their quiet rhythm. Work, home, park, repeat. Her life wasn't exciting, but it was steady. Yet deep inside, she sometimes wondered if she would ever get a real chance. Something different, something meaningful. Then one morning she received a letter. It was slipped under her door, folded neatly inside a plain envelope. She opened it, curious. The note was short, typed carefully, and it read, "Dear Miss, we are looking for kind-hearted individuals for a new community program aimed at helping families in need. Your name was suggested to us as someone who fits this role. If you're interested, please contact us at the address below." There was no signature, just an office address and a phone number. She read it twice, confused. Who could have suggested her? She didn't know many people, and she had never volunteered before. She hesitated for a few days, unsure whether it was real. But something inside her told her to try, so she decided to visit the address after work. It was in a part of the city she had never been to, quiet streets lined with tall trees and glass buildings. When she reached the location, she saw a modern office with a sign that read, "Hope Foundation, Helping Hands for Families." She stood outside for a moment, feeling nervous. She almost turned back, but then she remembered her mother's words again. Don't be afraid of good things. Taking a deep breath, she walked inside. The lobby was bright and welcoming. A receptionist greeted her warmly and asked her to wait. As she sat down, She noticed pictures on the walls, photographs of smiling children, families receiving support, and volunteers helping in different places. She felt a strange sense of belonging just looking at them. After a few minutes, someone came to greet her, a polite young woman who said they had received her name through a referral. "We're always looking for kind people," she said kindly. "And someone told us about a small act you did that showed great compassion." The woman was surprised. "A small act?" she asked softly. "Yes," the young woman said with a smile. "Sometimes small acts show the biggest hearts." She didn't know who had told them or how they had found her name, but she felt her heart warm. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not for what she had, but for who she was. The woman filled out a few forms and was told that someone from the foundation would contact her soon for an interview. She left the office that day feeling both nervous and hopeful. As she walked back through the busy streets, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe this was something good. Maybe this was the start of a new chapter. She looked up at the sky. The sun was setting behind the buildings, painting everything in soft orange light. The world felt large and full of unknown paths, but she wasn't afraid. That night she wrote in her small notebook, something she hadn't done in years. She wrote only one sentence. "Sometimes one kind act changes everything, even when we don't see it yet." She closed the notebook and smiled. She didn't know it then, but this simple note would become a quiet promise for the future. A promise that the kindness she once gave away would soon find its way back to her in the most unexpected way. Days passed, and the woman couldn't stop thinking about the visit to that foundation office. Every evening after work, she would look at the small note they had given her, a phone number and a promise that someone would contact her soon. A week went by, then another. She almost began to think they had forgotten about her, but deep down she felt calm. Maybe it wasn't time yet. Maybe good things needed patience. One afternoon, just as she was finishing her shift at the cafe, her old phone buzzed on the counter. She wiped her hands quickly and answered. A polite voice on the other side said, "Hello, is this the woman who visited Hope Foundation?" Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes, that's me," she said. "We'd like to invite you for a short interview tomorrow morning if you're available," the voice said kindly. She felt a wave of warmth spread through her chest. "Yes, I'll be there." "Thank you." That night she barely slept. She laid out her cleanest clothes, ironed a simple white shirt, and packed her old folder with certificates, the ones she still had from school. They weren't much, but they were hers. The next morning she reached the office early. The receptionist recognized her and smiled, asking her to wait. She sat quietly, hands clasped in her lap, watching people go in and out. Everyone seemed busy but happy. The air inside felt different, calm and full of purpose. Soon she was called inside a bright room where two people were waiting. One of them was a kind-faced woman who introduced herself as the manager. The other was a man who sat quietly, reading through her form. The manager began softly. "We read about you from someone who spoke highly of your kindness. Can you tell us a little about yourself?" She nodded, trying to steady her voice. "I work at a cafe. I came from a small town to the city to help my mother. Life isn't easy, but I try to do what I can. I don't have much experience, but I like helping people." The manager smiled. "That's exactly the kind of person we want." They asked her a few more questions: how she would handle people in need, how she felt about community work, and what motivated her. She answered honestly. There were no perfect words, just truth. When the interview ended, they thanked her and said they would be in touch soon. As she walked out, she felt lighter. Even if she didn't get the job, she felt proud that she had tried. For the first time in a long while, she had done something that made her believe she could be more than her struggles. That evening, she went back to the cafe, served customers as usual, and smiled at the regulars who came for their evening tea. No one there knew that her heart was quietly holding on to new hope. 2 days later, another call came. "Congratulations," the voice said warmly. "You've been selected as one of our assistants at the foundation." She couldn't believe it. She covered her mouth and whispered, thank you so much." It wasn't a high-paying position, but it was meaningful. Her work would involve visiting families, helping distribute food, and assisting in small education programs for children. When she hung up, she looked around her tiny room and smiled. For the first time, it didn't feel small. It felt like the beginning of something new. Her first day at the foundation was full of nervous excitement. She was given a small desk, a notebook, and a badge with her name on it. Everyone around her seemed kind and welcoming. She spent the day learning how the programs worked and listening to stories from other volunteers. One story stayed with her. A volunteer shared how a small donation had helped a single father care for his sick daughter after being stuck in the city for days. The woman froze for a second when she heard that. It sounded almost like the man she had helped at the station. But she didn't ask more. She just smiled quietly to herself. Days turned into weeks. Her job wasn't easy. Sometimes she had to walk long distances to reach certain families. Sometimes she dealt with people who had lost almost everything. But she listened to their stories, offered help, and did her best to make them smile. One afternoon, she visited a small school supported by the foundation. The children ran around, laughing and playing. Their joy filled the air. She helped hand out books and snacks, and one little girl hugged her tightly before running back to class. That moment filled her heart with warmth. She realized she had never felt this kind of happiness before, the kind that comes from making others feel seen and cared for. In the evenings, she sometimes stayed late at the office, helping sort supplies or update records. She didn't mind the extra hours. It felt like she was building something that mattered. Her coworkers began to notice her dedication. They often said, "You always have a smile, even on tough days." She would laugh softly and reply, "There's always a reason to smile if we look for it." But behind that smile, life was still a struggle. Her rent was due and her savings were thin. Sometimes she skipped meals to stretch her money. Yet she never complained. She believed that hard times didn't last forever. One rainy evening, she was closing the office when the manager called her in. "You've been doing great work," she said. "There's someone who wants to meet you tomorrow. He's a major supporter of our foundation." The woman nodded politely, not thinking much of it. She assumed it would be a short, formal meeting. The next day, she arrived early again. The staff gathered in the conference room, setting up for the visitor. She helped place water bottles and arrange chairs, not realizing that this meeting would change everything. When the door opened, the manager stood and smiled. "Welcome back," she said to the guest. The woman looked up and froze. Standing there was the same man from the train station. He looked different now, neatly dressed, calm, confident, but his eyes were the same. He glanced around the room and then stopped when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Recognition flashed in his eyes. The manager noticed the pause and looked between them. "Do you two know each other?" The man smiled gently. "Yes," he said quietly, "I do. She's the reason I'm here." The room went silent. Everyone looked surprised. The woman's heart was racing and her hands trembled slightly. The man stepped forward. "Months ago, I was at a train station with my daughter. I couldn't get a ticket home. This woman gave me hers, and without knowing who I was. She didn't even wait for thanks. That moment changed something in me." He paused, looking directly at her. "I realized how one small act of kindness can change a life. My daughter recovered, and I promised myself I would build something that could help others the way she helped me. That's how this foundation grew stronger, because of her." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She had never expected to see him again, let alone hear something like that. She felt her throat tighten as she whispered, "I didn't do anything special." The man shook his head gently. "You did everything. You reminded me that goodness still exists. I owe this mission to you." Everyone in the room clapped softly, touched by the story. The manager placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, whispering, "Now I understand why your name was suggested to us." After the meeting, the man invited her to his office. He explained how he had come to the city that day after his daughter's treatment, and how he had started funding charity projects since then. "I kept thinking about you," he said. "When I told my team about what happened, they helped find you. I wanted you to be part of this, not as a worker, but as someone who leads with heart." The woman was speechless. She could barely believe what she was hearing. She had given away a single train ticket, and now that small act had found its way back in the most unexpected form. He offered her a new role, one where she could help design programs, visit communities, and inspire others. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready, but he looked at her kindly. "You've already been doing this all along," he said. That evening, as she walked home in the fading light, her steps felt lighter than ever. She thought of her mother, her tiny room in the rainy morning months ago. Everything that once seemed like a small moment now felt like part of a larger picture. She realized that life has its own way of returning kindness, not always quickly, but always beautifully. When she reached home, she sat by the window and looked out at the city lights. She whispered softly to herself, "Maybe kindness never really ends. It just keeps finding new places to shine." The next few days felt almost unreal for her. Everything that had happened played again and again in her mind. The train station, the tired father, the little girl, and now this unexpected twist in her life. It was as if all those moments had quietly led her here, step by step, without her even realizing it. After that emotional meeting at the foundation, she returned home and sat on her small bed for a long time. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of rain outside. She looked at the small notebook where she had written her thoughts weeks ago. Sometimes one kind act changes everything. She ran her fingers over the words and smiled softly. She didn't know that life would prove them true so soon. The next morning she was invited to meet the man again, this time not as a guest, but as part of a new project team. When she entered his office, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the city below. The sunlight poured through the glass, painting the room in soft golden tones. He turned around and smiled kindly, the same gentle expression she had seen at the train station when she handed him her ticket. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." She nodded quietly and sat down, still feeling nervous around him. Even though he treated her kindly, there was still a part of her that couldn't believe all this was real. He began to explain how he had started the foundation after his daughter recovered. He spoke about his plans to expand it, to build small learning centers for children, support single parents, and create programs that could lift families out of hardship. "But I don't want it to just be about money," he said. "I want it to have heart, and that's why I need people like you." She listened carefully, her heart slowly filling with both surprise and gratitude. He wasn't offering her a job out of charity. He truly believed in her. That meant more than any amount of money could. He continued, "When I met you, you didn't ask for anything in return. You didn't even know who I was. That kind of kindness is rare. I want that spirit to guide everything we do here. I want you to be part of our leadership team, to help shape our work." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Me? But I don't have experience in leading anything." "I only worked in a cafe," he smiled. "Experience can be learned. Heart cannot. You already have what matters most." She felt her eyes sting with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. That day changed everything. She started working closely with the foundation team, learning new things every day, how to plan outreach programs, how to speak with donors, and how to manage volunteers. It wasn't easy, and sometimes she doubted herself, but the man always encouraged her. "You're doing well," he would say. "Just keep being yourself." In the weeks that followed, she began visiting rural areas where the foundation was opening community centers. She met families struggling to send their children to school, mothers who worked day and night, and children who dreamed big despite having little. Every story touched her deeply. She listened with patience and treated everyone with respect. People started trusting her, sharing their problems as if she were part of their family. One day, while visiting a small village school, a little girl ran up to her and handed her a hand-drawn picture. It showed two people, one giving a ticket to the other, and a train in the background. The drawing made her heart stop for a moment. She laughed softly and asked, "How did you think of this?" The girl smiled shyly and said, "My teacher told me a story about a kind lady who helped a father and his child at a train station. I wanted to draw it." The woman's eyes filled with tears. The story had spread, she realized. Not because she had told it, but because kindness has a way of traveling quietly from one heart to another. When she returned to the city that evening, she went straight to the foundation office. The man was there reading through reports. She showed him the drawing and he smiled when he saw it. "She reminded me of us," she said softly. He nodded. "You see, this is what I mean when I say kindness spreads. You may not even know how far it travels." From then on, her work became her passion. She would often stay late in the office, writing letters to donors, checking lists, and planning future projects. Every small success and every child who got to study, every family that received help, felt like a victory. Months passed, and the foundation grew stronger. The man often included her in important meetings. He trusted her ideas and valued her opinions. She learned to speak confidently, something she had never imagined herself doing before. Sometimes she looked around the bright office and thought about her old cafe job, about the tired nights and long shifts. Life had changed in ways she could never have planned. But even with her growing responsibilities, she never let pride take over. She stayed humble, always remembering the day when she had been just another face in a crowded station. She often told the new volunteers, "Never think small acts don't matter. You never know how powerful they can be." Her connection with the man also grew stronger, though it wasn't built on wealth or authority. It was built on mutual respect, on understanding what kindness could do. He would sometimes tell her stories about his daughter, who was now healthy and going to school. He said she still remembered the woman who gave up her seat that rainy morning. "She calls you the lady with the warm smile," he said once, laughing softly. Those words stayed in her heart. She realized that life had quietly come full circle, from a moment of giving to a lifetime of meaning. As time went on, she started training new members at the foundation. She taught them how to approach families with empathy, how to listen without judgment, and how to never lose hope no matter how hard things got. Her calm presence became a source of comfort for many. One afternoon, the foundation held a community event where hundreds of people gathered: families, volunteers, donors, and children. There were colorful banners, small stalls of handmade crafts, and laughter everywhere. The man took the stage to thank everyone for their support. When he called her up to speak, she froze for a moment, nervous as ever. But when she saw the crowd, faces full of hope, she took a deep breath and began. She didn't use big words. She spoke simply, just like she lived. She told them how she once worked long hours at a cafe, how she gave up a train ticket one rainy morning, and how that small moment had changed her life. "I didn't do it expecting anything," she said softly. "I just saw someone who needed help. But that act showed me something, that when you give kindness freely, the world finds a way to give it back to you." Her voice trembled as she finished, and for a moment, the crowd was silent. Then the applause came, gentle at first, then louder and warmer. People stood up, clapping and smiling. Some even wiped their eyes. The man joined her on stage and whispered, "You did beautifully." She smiled through her tears, grateful beyond words. After the event, as she walked among the crowd, a woman approached her with a baby in her arms. "Your story gave me courage," she said softly. "I was losing hope, but now I feel I can start again." The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can," she said gently. "Just keep going." That night, when the event ended, she walked out into the cool air. The city lights shimmered in the distance and the streets were quiet. She stopped by the same train station where everything had started months ago. The benches were still there, the noise of trains still echoing in the air. She stood there for a while, remembering how lost she had felt that day, waiting for the next train after giving away her ticket. She smiled, realizing that the same place that had once made her feel uncertain now filled her with peace. It wasn't just a station anymore. It was the beginning of everything. She looked around, noticing a man struggling with luggage while holding a sleeping child. For a brief moment, it was like watching her own memory come alive. Without thinking, she walked over and offered help. The man thanked her and she helped him lift the bags. As she did, she realized how naturally kindness had become a part of her. Not something she needed to think about, but something that simply flowed. She turned to leave, her heart light. As she stepped outside, the night breeze brushed against her face, carrying the scent of rain. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." Life had come full circle, but she knew it wasn't the end. It was just another beginning, one that would keep unfolding, one act of kindness at a time. Time moved quietly, like pages turning in a book she hadn't planned to write but somehow became the main character of. Months turned into years, and her life took a shape she could have never imagined. What began with one small act at a crowded train station had now grown into a purpose that gave her every day new meaning. The foundation had become something beautiful. It was no longer just a group of people helping others. It was a living example of how compassion could ripple through lives. Children who once struggled to study were now graduating. Parents who had once given up were building small businesses. Smiles had replaced the tired eyes she used to see in the beginning. and through all of it she remained grounded, always reminding herself of how it all began, with a simple choice to be kind when no one was watching. Every morning, she would arrive early at the foundation's office, carrying a small cup of tea and a calm smile. The man who had once been a stranger now felt like an older brother, someone she deeply respected. They shared a bond built not on status or money but on trust and shared purpose. He still worked tirelessly, though his health sometimes showed signs of slowing down. On those days, she made sure he rested, reminding him gently that the world wouldn't fall apart if he paused to breathe. One evening, as they reviewed reports together, he leaned back and looked at her thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "I've always wondered something. That day at the train station, what made you decide to give me your ticket? You didn't know me and you could have easily walked away." She thought for a moment before answering. "I don't really know," she admitted softly. "I just saw someone who looked like they needed help more than I did, and it felt like the right thing to do." He smiled slowly. "Sometimes the right things happen when we don't think too hard about them." They both laughed quietly, and for a moment the office felt warm, almost like home. A few days later, she traveled to a small town to visit a new community center the foundation had opened. It was a long drive, and as she looked out the window, she saw children playing in the fields, families walking together, and workers returning home with tired but content faces. It reminded her of how life continued, quietly, beautifully, when people cared for one another. When she reached the center, a group of children ran to greet her. Their laughter filled the air, light and joyful. One little boy tugged at her hand and said, "Miss, they told us you're the one who started this place." She knelt down to his level and smiled. "Not me alone," she said. "It takes many hearts to build something good." The boy grinned and nodded as if he understood more than his age allowed. That small moment filled her chest with warmth. Every visit like this reminded her that the work wasn't just about helping people survive. It was about helping them dream again. Later that day, she sat outside the center, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers. She thought about her life, the hardships, the lonely nights, and the quiet strength she had built through it all. She didn't have everything the world called success, but she had something much deeper: peace. When she returned to the city, she found a letter waiting for her at the office. It was from the man. He had gone abroad for a short business trip, and the letter had been sent before he left. The handwriting was neat, full of warmth and care. He wrote, "If you're reading this, I'm probably somewhere on a plane, looking out at the clouds and thinking about how far we've come. I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've turned kindness into something living, something real. Whatever happens next, promise me one thing: never lose faith in the goodness of people. The world can be hard, but kindness will always find a way back to you." She folded the letter carefully and kept it in her bag. His words stayed with her for weeks, like a quiet melody playing in the background of her days. One morning, as she was preparing for a meeting, she received a call. The voice on the other end was calm but serious. The man had fallen ill while abroad and had been admitted to a hospital. Her heart tightened instantly. Without a second thought, she booked a flight that same night and went to see him. When she arrived, he was resting in a quiet room. He looked pale but peaceful, a gentle smile still on his face when he saw her walk in. "You didn't have to come all this way," he whispered. "I had to," she said softly. "You once told me that kindness should never stop halfway." He chuckled weakly. "You remembered that." She sat beside him, holding his hand, and for a while they just talked. Not about work, not about money or success, but about life. He told her about his daughter, how she was growing up strong and curious. He said she wanted to join the foundation one day. "She wants to help people like you do," he said proudly. Hearing that made her smile. "She'll do great things," she said. "She already has a good heart." The next few days passed slowly. She stayed by his side, helping the staff, reading to him or just sitting quietly when words weren't needed. He often told her stories from his childhood, stories about how his own parents had taught him to help others. "Maybe that's why I noticed you that day," he said one evening. "You reminded me of what I'd forgotten." After a week, his condition improved slightly and he was allowed to return home. She helped him settle back, making sure he had everything he needed. But the time spent in that hospital changed something in her. It reminded her that even strong people need care too, that kindness wasn't just about giving, it was also about being there when someone needed you. Months passed, and the man gradually recovered. Together, they continued to grow the foundation, but this time they also made sure to take time for themselves, to rest, to laugh, to live. One afternoon, the foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary. The event was simple, held in a big open park surrounded by families and children whose lives had been touched by their work. There were colorful balloons, laughter, and music. The man gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their love and support. Then he turned to her and said something that silenced the crowd. "This foundation exists because of a single act of kindness," he said. "A stranger once gave up her train ticket so I could take my sick child home. She didn't know who I was and she didn't expect anything back. But that one small act changed everything, not just for me but for hundreds of families you see here today." He paused and looked at her. "She taught me that real wealth isn't in money, it's in compassion. And I hope everyone here carries that lesson forward." The audience erupted into applause. Some clapped, some cried quietly, and others just smiled, touched by the story they'd just heard. She stood there humbled, her eyes shining with emotion. She hadn't done any of this for recognition. Yet standing there surrounded by all those people, she felt something deeper. Gratitude. Gratitude for being given the chance to make a difference. After the event, a young volunteer approached her. "Do you really think small acts can change lives?" he asked, his tone curious but sincere. She smiled. "I don't just think so," she said gently. "I've lived it." That evening, as the crowd left and the sun dipped behind the trees, she walked quietly along the path. The park lights flickered on, glowing softly against the dusk. The man stood a few steps away, watching her with a smile. "You've come a long way," he said. "So have you," she replied. "We both did." He nodded. "Maybe that's what kindness does. It doesn't just help others. It helps us find who we really are." They both stood there for a while, listening to the distant sound of laughter and the rustling of leaves in the evening wind. Life had changed in so many ways, but its lessons remained the same. Give without expecting, love without condition, and believe that one act of kindness can echo farther than you'll ever know. Years later, the foundation continued to grow, helping thousands across the country. The woman became a symbol of hope, not because she was rich or powerful, but because she proved that ordinary people could do extraordinary things through compassion. She often visited schools and told children her story, always beginning with the same line. It started with a train ticket, and as she spoke, her voice carried warmth, simplicity, and truth. The kind of truth that only real kindness can teach. In the quiet of her own life, she kept that old notebook where she once wrote, "Sometimes, one kind act changes everything." The pages were worn, the ink faded, but the words still held the same power. Whenever she felt tired or unsure, she opened it and smiled, because she now knew. Kindness wasn't just something you give once. It was something you lived every single day. And as the years passed, her story, the one that began with a tired father, a sick child, and a train ticket, became a reminder for countless others that no act of kindness is ever wasted. It always finds its way back, often in ways you least expect, quietly turning moments into miracles.